Hi everyone, this is Rabbi Yoni from Congregation Shari Tzedek. Thank you for watching Three Opinions. This is season 2 and our first episode of the second season. I sit down with Stephanie Steinberg, the founder of the Detroit Writing Room and of Coaching Detroit Forward. It was just an amazing opportunity to talk about the creative process, about writing and journalism and photography, and especially how these different subjects are affecting our youth and give the power, the potential for our young people who have really important things to say and things that we should all be listening to. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Stephanie Steinberg. So let me just, by way of, again too, so none of this is formal. Let me just put that out there right now. One of the things that's really great about how we're going to do this is that we get to just have a conversation. And we, for a little bit of background on the program, we started this during COVID, where we were in lockdown, and it was, what are we going to do? How do we program for a synagogue, which the vast majority, if not everything that we do, is about being in community and in person. So I said, we should do some interviews and just see what people are doing during lockdown and talking to people about some big ideas. And because everyone was in lockdown in the world, we got to just reach out to a lot of people from around the world who were not doing anything. So they said, okay, let's talk. So we had the opportunity to talk to some people, and it became great. It became kind of like a way for us to chat about big ideas, but also a way for us just to be in communication with other human beings, which is important. So this is our continuation of that, and this is actually our first time that we've done this since COVID, which was a program we thought we only needed for COVID, and then we realized that people were talking to us about, we kind of missed this idea of bringing in some different ideas and chatting with some other people who are doing amazing things. So that is a long-winded by way of introduction to welcome Stephanie Steinberg to Congregation Shari Tzedek and to Three Opinions.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here in person, and I'm honored to be the
live
first.
Audience.
Yeah,
We get
live audience.
There was no applause in my basement ever when we were doing this.
You can add in the sound effects.
I added the sound effects. Yeah. And there was a lot of jeering that I added too. Just I don't know why. So by even just saying that this isn't a formal interview, I usually, if we were in this room and I was introducing you, I would have this whole printout for you, meticulously researched and giving people the glowing CV that you have. And it is a beautiful CV. It is incredible. But I want to just start by letting you introduce yourself the way you want to introduce yourself. We're going to talk about some of the work that you're doing in Detroit and online and in other venues as well. But who are you? You grew up here. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about you.
All right. Well, thank you. Again, thank you all for coming in person. This is really quite an honor to be here and be an in-person guest. So who am I? I grew up in Farmington Hills. Been here my whole life. I was born in California. I will note that. And we moved when I was like a baby. So
Southern or northern?
We were in the valley.
Okay.
So for a couple months. So, but I am a Michigander.
Bombridge is from San Diego, so you guys can.
Wonderful. Yeah. Let's see. The short version, I guess, of like who am I, what do I do? I am the founder and CEO of the Detroit Writing Room, which we started in 2019, 9 months before COVID hit.
Impeccable timing.
Oh, great timing to start a business. Yeah. We had, like I said, 9 months to get going. So the Writing Room was a physical location in downtown Detroit on Washington Boulevard, very close to the Book Cadillac and the Book Tower. We hosted writing workshops, book talks, open mic nights, and we have a whole team of writing coaches who people can meet with for help on any kind of writing need, whether it's a book or a resume or a website. And then I'm also the founder, or I should say executive director of our nonprofit arm, Coaching Detroit Forward. So that is focused on helping Detroit high school students on writing and photography. So I'm sure we'll get into all of that, but that's sort of the short version of what I'm currently doing. I am a journalist by trade. I attended the University of Michigan, so go blue to anyone in the, yeah, go blue.
There are a few in here.
I
Tend to
was
be.
I was editor-in-chief of the Michigan Daily while a student there, so that's where I kind of kickstarted my journalism career. Along the way, I had interned at CNN, USA Today, locally at the Oakland Press and other small publications. But once I graduated, I went to Washington, D.C. for a couple years and was editor at U.S. News and World Report. Not the editor, I should say. I was a editor there. And so, yeah, that's sort of a little nugget of my experience.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Were you? I imagine if you were going into college with journalism and creative writing, were you a bookworm growing up?
Oh, yeah. I read constantly.
Okay.
My husband kind of makes fun of me because he'd ask about, like, what was I into when I was little? And I was like, well, I just kind of read all the time.
Yeah.
I
That was the
that kid.
question I was going to ask you too. Like, what was
Yeah.
the reading that was just like, I want to do this. I want to write stuff too.
Yeah, I knew since second grade that I wanted to be a journalist, which
Wow.
I realize now not many people know in second grade what they want to be, but I did.
I wanted to be a taxi driver when I was in second
Taxi
grade.
driver, okay, that's different.
It's very different,
Oh,
and
you could try Uber driving on the side.
I don't want to anymore.
Okay.
We've talked about it, so
Yeah.
I don't want
It
to.
wouldn't-
That
it might
dream
not go
has
so
that
well.
dream has faded and died, and we'll let it go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rabbi suits you well, I think.
Right. Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
But yeah, so I was in second grade and I was on a local TV station called Kid Stuff, and they actually had second graders go out and interview people for the show. So I would go to the Detroit Zoo and interview zookeepers on like the local animal exhibits.
That's really
and,
cool.
That kind of really sparked my interest in interviewing people and storytelling, and I knew, okay, this is what I want to do.
That's awesome. It's actually that's pretty interesting because bookworms tend to be introverts, and people who want to do journalism tend to be the people who love other people's stories and want to talk to them.
Yes.
Do you have like a balance of both of those parts of you, where you're like,
Yes.
leave me alone, I'm reading, and also part of you that's like, you're fascinating, I want to know everything about you?
100%. I mean, that's why I love journalism, because you can really talk to anybody. It gives you this passport to talk to anybody in the world, and you have permission to do so. You know, whether they're celebrities or government officials or just everyday people will just tell their story to you. So it's a really fantastic career in that way.
That's awesome. So are you gonna are there books that were like the books for you that, or you just read anything and everything?
Anything. I mostly fiction. I loved fiction. I still do. And nonfiction now is probably mostly what I read. But
Okay.
actually, I should correct that. It's a lot of picture books these days because I have a 15-month-old now. So
Shout out.
it's all
for
picture
sure.
books.
Oh yeah, there's some good picture books though.
Amazing picture
Board
books.
books for 15.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Really
Yeah.
good things. Awesome. Very cool. Did you read like the paper and stuff too when you were a kid?
Yeah, my family was a Detroit Free Press family and
Very
Oakland
cool.
Press, so we get that delivered when it was, every day. And I just grew up around, literature. So I guess it makes sense how I ended up starting the Detroit Writing Room.
Yeah. Because we are also in a synagogue, and I'm a rabbi. What about Jewishly?
Yeah.
What was your Jewish upbringing like? What did it look like?
So I'm a member of Temple Shir Shalom.
Shout out.
Since, forever. When they started, I guess I was like 6 years old. So my family is, one of the first few families there. And I was very active. I was actually on it's called SISTI, Shir Shalom Temple Youth Group Board. So I was
That's
president
an
at
awesome
one point.
acronym.
Yeah,
You know,
SISTI.
in Judaism, it's good if you have a really solid acronym.
Yes.
That's the cred for it. If you have a good acronym, then people know that you're serious.
I agree. So yeah, I was pretty involved in high school, in the Jewish youth group, and went to Monday night school, and obviously did Sunday school, and had my bar mitzvah. So, yeah.
Awesome. Good. So one of the things that we try to dig into, we let the conversation go wherever the conversation wants to go, but also these big questions of kind of the spiritual and the meaningful and the I was about to say the poetry, but that also just is part of the writing process anyway, but about your journey, but also just the things that you have found to be meaningful in your life, and especially when we're talking about writing, and we're talking about journalism, that's a big part of what I want to talk about. But I want to talk first about coaching Detroit forward, because something that's so special that you do is not just writing or telling a story, but it's empowering other people to write and tell a story.
Yeah.
So if you can just talk a little bit about coaching Detroit forward, and I guess the big question attached to that is why? Like, what was the impetus? What was that made you want to start this? And you've been going for 3 years and 4 years now?
Yeah, it'll be our 4th summer now, which
Amazing.
is crazy. So when we started the Detroit Writing Room in 2019, we have 30 writing coaches. Like I said, a lot of them are authors, journalists. We've got grant writers and screenwriters on our team. And I quickly realized that I wanted Detroit high school students to be able to access these amazing writers who could become mentors and help these students maybe explore different career fields that they didn't know even existed. So a couple months after we opened the doors, we filed for the 501c3 status for Coach Detroit Forward so that we could get grants and donations in order to offer programs for students and not charge them, because our coaching is, there's a fee for adults to sign up with our coaches. So it's been a really cool journey just launching a nonprofit, especially during the pandemic, but crash course on how to launch something and keep it going.
Right, yeah.
So our signature programs are journalism and photography camps for Detroit high school students. And basically we offer these summer experiences for free. We have a team of coaches who teach them, and the students are empowered to write a story in the journalism camp, a story about anything that they really want to, anything that interests them, that they care about. And we turn their stories into a print publication. For those of you in the audience, you can see I've got examples of our 2021 and 2022 magazines. It's called Perspectives Magazine, and it features all their stories as well as photos from the photography camp students. So for the photography camp, we give the students a professional camera to borrow and a laptop as well. And they spend 2 weeks taking photos around the city of Detroit. They're taught by professional photographers in the city, and they kind of get a crash course on photography for beginners. And this summer, I'm excited, we're going to have an advanced photography camp as well that's going to teach more of photo editing and how to use Photoshop and Lightroom to edit your photos. So it's been a really rewarding experience working with Detroit high school students in particular. With the journalism camp, we do let Metro Detroit students attend as well for a registration fee. But for the Detroit students who are on scholarship, they're really appreciative of the experience, and often they don't have journalism programs at their high schools, or if they do, they're not taught by actual former journalists. It's maybe an English teacher who's just teaching it on the side. So they get real life experience from us. They work with, reporters from the Detroit Free Press, Detroit News, Michigan Chronicle, and then with COVID, we were able to do it virtually, so we could connect with journalists across the country, which is really great.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's been fun to give Detroit youth a platform to tell a story that they want to, and then we'll put it on the website too, so they can share it out with their friends and family.
And what was the first class size, and what are you up to now?
So the first summer was 2020. We were going to do it in person, and then the pandemic hit, so I had to pivot and put it all on Zoom. And so we were able to have students from Detroit, but also across the country join in. So we had students from California and Florida and New York, and it was really a cool thing, actually, to have all these students nationwide connect with Detroit high school students who would never otherwise meet these students, I don't think, at least. So that class size, I'm trying to think, we probably had around 20, 25 students on Zoom with us every day for 2 weeks.
So is it a cohort too, where they're like sharing work with each other, but also like sharing in the experience and like giving each other tips and advice, and also like what's the social aspect that comes with that?
Yeah, I mean, when you're on Zoom, there are some limitations, as you
For sure.
know, but
Yeah.
we would throw the students into breakout rooms so that they could get to know each other one-on-one a little bit better without even an adult in the room. And we also pair them with an editing coach, so they get a professional journalist who will help guide them through the story that they're writing, help with their angle, their sources, and be that support if they have a question. So
Awesome.
yeah, and we stay in touch with these students. The coolest part of this is now I have students who have graduated high school and are now in college, and they're studying English or communications or journalism. Some are writing for their college papers. So it's been really fun to watch them, and now
That's
I can't
awesome.
wait to see, like, even in the next couple years, what will happen if they end up at actual media outlets and where they wind up.
Yeah, and with how dramatically the face of media and everything changes so quickly too, that they're in this position of pioneering new things while, kind of the I don't mean this in any negative way, but kind of the old guard of journalism is,
Yeah.
you know, you are also in this unique position of watching them learn things that you didn't learn when you were in school and other things
Absolutely.
too.
Yeah, Instagram like didn't even exist when I was, working
That
at the
can't
college
be
paper.
possible. It can't be possible.
I don't think it did, at least. I don't think we were using it.
No,
So,
I'm sure.
yeah, it's wild.
Truly wild. And I'm already getting us way off topic, but I'm okay with it. Is, you said something that is already striking, which is these kids, a lot of them don't have journalism classes at their school, which I think you could our mind could immediately go to, well, public schools in Detroit or whatever, but that's just schools, period.
Yeah.
Now we're getting rid of. I mean, journalism is actually an interesting one because it's actually a path to a career, but the humanities in general is going out the window, right? So
Yeah,
get
my
rid of
high
creative
school-
writing, get rid right.
North Farmington High School got rid of our newspaper, our journalism class, which is devastating to me because
Yeah.
that's how I got started, even before college. So,
Yeah, when I was growing up, we didn't have, the only thing we had was yearbook, which was not even, to go find a story for the yearbook and is laughable, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know if that exists anymore. And
I hope so.
yeah, I hope so too, because it gives some kind of just expression. And I think that one of the things that I want us to talk about is why it's so necessary. While we see it gutted across the country, and for money that was allocated and fought so hard to be allocated for the humanities and creative writing and for outlets of inspiration,
Yeah.
that it's being taken away. Why is this something that you have really championed for, but also just why do we need it in general?
Yeah, I think I've learned a lot running these camps with high school students. I mean, I am not a teacher. I didn't ever go into education or get a certificate in teaching or anything like that. This is just sort of a passion of mine now. But what I've learned is that high school students care. They deeply care about issues in the world and what's happening around them. And I think adults write them off a lot of the times as, oh, you're just 16, you're in high school, like, what do you know? But actually, they're very in tune to what's happening, especially growing up. I'm talking about 2020 when I had our first class during the Black Lives Matter movement. It was COVID, the pandemic. They were all learning virtually at home and, stripped of their social networks and their friends in person. So they went through a lot in the last couple of years, and I think we are starting to see the impact of that on their mental health. At least based on what I've seen in their stories, a lot of them have written about social media and the impact of mental health and how it's damaging to them. So where am I going with this? I'm just trying to say that these students really, they think about things deeply, and they want to be able to offer solutions for the world and be listened and heard. And I think giving them a platform in something like a magazine, and then also we have media outlets that will sometimes republish their stories, which is even better for their exposure, but more importantly for them to just be heard and listened to. It does a lot for their confidence and makes them feel empowered.
For sure. Again, just while you were saying that, is how immediately and I mean like any generation that's not their generation, really is, we just feel so cavalier about pontificating about the way they feel or what they're going through
Yeah.
without actually listening to the stories that are coming from them directly.
Yeah.
I remember, we all remember, when COVID was starting and the pandemic, and all of these people were arguing about, the safety of our kids in school physically, and the safety of our kids emotionally and psychologically, and all of these talking heads, and just the dearth of actual students coming and saying, I miss my friends, or I'm desperate for this, or I'm scared of this. And that's just COVID. That's not bringing up, the pandemic of school shootings. It's not bringing up all of these different things that these kids are growing up in ways that they shouldn't have to.
Yeah.
And the last thing that we should be doing is keeping their voices from being heard.
Absolutely. So this is just one small thing I feel like I can do to help empower them and let them tell a story and talk to their communities. And that's the one thing, if you're not so familiar with journalism, when you write a story, you're expected to have at least 2 to 3 sources in it, and sources should be people sources. So we have the students go out and actually interview people in the community and experts on the topic that they're trying to write about. So it's a really great learning experience for them, but then they also get to make connections with people who might actually be able to help them. If they're writing about something regarding mental health and social media, now they're connected to a therapist. So
that's awesome. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Do you have any examples, just like on the top of your head, of just some things that you've read, some pieces that you've read, or some photography that you've seen from some of these students that you're just like shattered? Or
so and I'll just mention, so there's the Society for Professional Journalists Detroit chapter, and we actually were just at the awards ceremony on Monday, which is a couple days ago, and basically the entire Southeast Michigan region, the journalists in the region can apply to this awards ceremony to be honored for their work. And I submit the students' stories and photos as well. And they're the only high school students at this award ceremony. Maybe there are other students that are submitting, but they're not maybe becoming finalists. I don't know. But that's all to say that we've had now a couple dozen of our students win awards from this SBJ chapter. And those are the stories that I think are like the most memorable ones. We had one from 2 summers ago now, 2021, who I was a Detroit high school student. She had just lost her father a couple months before. The grief was really still fresh and raw. And so she wrote a story about what it's like to lose a parent as a teenager. And again, she talked to therapists, and she talked to other students who had also lost a loved one very close to them. And it was almost like a healing process for her to be able to write about it. And at the end of her piece, this is not standard journalism formatting, but she wrote a poem. She was a poet, and she wanted to write a poem about her father, so that was included at the bottom. And that one won first place, as it should, in the health category. So, that was the one that was very memorable.
Wow. Again, voices that on topics that we don't even usually, we talk about grief all the time. We talk about loss all the time. And there are books that people throw out all the time, right? A Year of Magical Thinking, Joan Didion, I can't remember this, Nancy, there's another great book that is all about a year of tackling grief. And those are the books that we all recommend to one another, because it's an older perspective of things that are happening when they're supposed to happen, and we don't talk about it at all, because those are the things that shouldn't happen, right? Losing a parent when you're a teenager. And yet it does.
Yeah.
It happens every day. And these are stories that we should hear, and they're stories that are powerful.
Yeah.
I also I did a little Instagram stalking before we did this.
That's fair.
So to see the award ceremony in your pictures is also just incredibly cool, because it's easy to paint Southeast Michigan with a pretty easy brushstroke, and to see these young people who are people of color and people wearing hijabs and other telling stories that are just the makeup of our community, right? And it's also just elevating voices for voices that just aren't heard very often.
Yeah.
And how incredibly powerful that is for journalism, but also just for who we are as a society, because we don't do it a lot.
I agree. And the media too, is a little bit at fault because we don't tend to publish the voices of, people younger than college necessarily. It just doesn't happen. There's no space and resources are very tight now these days. So I understand why that happens, but it is a shame because they have stories to tell and opinions as well.
I feel like the only place where we allow it to happen for whatever reason is either in poetry or music.
Hmm.
Young people are allowed to express themselves through music,
That's true.
and we've kind of always done that. Like Bob Dylan's words when he was 16 or 17,
Yeah.
then that it was allowed. But when you're doing journalism pieces or different things like that, it feels different.
Hmm.
But it's still the power of story, and it's still the power of expression. I'm wondering for you, when you write, and when we've talked before, you said that you don't write as much. A 15-month-old will do that to you.
Yeah.
That happens.
Yes.
But when you get a chance to write, what does that process feel like? What does it do? And I guess I'm asking this on like the practical level, but also kind of the metaphysical level of what does it do to you,
Yeah.
and what does it do for you? For what does it look like in practice, and what does it do for you spiritually, emotionally?
Yeah,
Everything.
no, that's a great question. So the reason why I don't write as much anymore is because when I write, I really want to have like hours blocked off to write. Like I can't be interrupted. I can't write for 20 minutes, stop, and come back to what I'm working on. That's just not the writer that I am. I need to have like a good chunk of time to get into it and like really just from start to finish get it out on the page.
I think if you talk to your 15-month-old and tell her that, she'll understand. And
Maybe in a couple years. So yeah, I'm saving those stories for in a couple years probably. But for me, when I write, you're right. There is something internally that kind of awakens, that like turns on in my brain at least. That is a really, I can't describe it, but it's an awesome feeling
Yeah.
where I feel inspired and empowered, and the words are flowing, and it's like a creative process that I can't replicate in any other kind of hobby, really, for me. It's just something that I find pure joy in. And I don't know if everyone feels that way or all journalists feel that way, but when I'm writing a story that I know is a really good story, like you have that feeling inside of you, like, yes, this is going to be a good one. And then when you're writing a story that's not so good, you can also tell, at least for me, I'm like, oh, this is going to take some rework and some drafts. But yeah, there's something that happens internally that I can't describe it because it's
Right.
that internal feeling.
I mean, that's a mystical thing,
That
right?
is it, yeah.
Once you can't describe it, then you know it's something worth talking about, even though it's impossible to talk about it,
Yeah.
if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But I think that's right, and I think that we'll open it up at the end to let some folks ask some questions too. But for anyone who writes out there, I think everyone experiences that in some capacity of writing something down and being like, this is it. Something's flowing.
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, which is a book I don't like at all.
Really? Why not?
I just don't. I have issues with the philosophy of it.
Okay.
But that's a big caveat. She gave this TED Talk, which is a really amazing TED Talk, where she talks about finishing this book, and she's all she needs to do to finish it is to think of the title, and she can't think of the
Interesting.
title at all.
Yeah.
And she's spending days, and she writes an email to all of her friends, and she says something like, I can't find a way for this piece of finish, right, to give me the title that it's supposed to be. And one of her friends writes back to her and says, it's never going to tell you the title if you talk about it like that. And she says, like, at first I just laughed and like, that's a silly thing to say. But then she started taking it really seriously, of being like, there's this idea of the muse, right, or the genius that comes from genie, which is all of this mystical stuff about writing that has been around for a long, long time that we kind of flippantly talk about. And she said, what if I just suspend all of my modern thinking and my intellect of all of these different things and just actually speak to my book and let the writing that has come through me and felt in this way, like this thing that just told its own story, let it title itself. and it did, and it has this, world-renowned title that people know. But there's something to that, right?
Yeah.
There's something to the process of letting it feel, like let it take itself over.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, you talked about that as being pure joy. And I think in some ways it can also be hard.
Oh, yeah.
Not just challenging to like find the right thing, but like sometimes when you're writing, you're just like, this hurts me to write. And I'm sure as a journalist, you've had those stories when you're writing and you're like, this is the story I need to tell, but it's also, what a painful story.
Yes.
So what does that feel? How is, like, when you get to that spot?
Yeah. Ooh, yeah. When you're telling other people's stories and other people have gone through pain and trauma, and you're kind of absorbing the pain and the trauma because they're just pouring it out onto you, you almost feel like a therapist in some ways. And that it's not easy, but you kind of have to go to another place and remember, like, this is part of your job, and you just have to listen, and you have to then take their words and put it onto the page, right, in the most truthful way you possibly can. I feel for a lot of journalists now who are covering like school shootings, like you mentioned earlier, because that is trauma that you are living in real time as well, and you have to then, be a reporter and do your job and quickly turn around the story for the public. So I hope I never have to be in one of those situations. But yeah, it's tough work being a journalist, I will say.
Yeah, man, I think we talk a lot. I think we think about the journalists who are in like war zones, and we're like, look at the physical safety or physical danger that they're putting themselves in. I don't think we talk a lot about the emotional danger that you can also put yourself in.
Definitely.
And also the incredible responsibility that comes with that when someone's pouring their heart out to you, and everything that they're going through, the pain, their experience, and they're saying, you're now responsible for my story.
Yes.
Go tell it in a way that's going to make some change, right?
Yep.
Or at least just be true to what I'm telling you.
It's a lot of weight put on your shoulders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you cope with that?
Again, I think you just go to a different place and you remember, like, this is your job, and this is you're a storyteller, and you're here to tell their story. And again, if it's something very sensitive, often as journalists we'll go back to that source and let them read a passage and make sure they're okay with it. Typically with journalism, you don't give your story to the source before publication for multiple reasons, but again, if it's very sensitive in nature, the ethical thing to do is to let them look at it before it goes to print.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Can I tell you what I do?
What do you do?
When I do a funeral, I'm letting all of you now know what I do.
Ooh, deep secrets.
I was going to say we'll keep this between us, but that's not the point of this at all. Whenever I do a funeral,
Yeah.
Especially in summertime, after the funeral, go to Dairy Queen, and I get a Blizzard, and I sit in a parking lot for at least a half an hour, because then I have to go back to work and do simchas and do other things. This coming Sunday, I have a baby naming and an unveiling.
Mm.
And those are two things that are very different from one another in the same day.
Yeah.
And that Blizzard, silly as it seems, can help put me in a different way of because telling someone's story, which is my job for a funeral,
It's very similar.
is painful, and it comes with that weight of saying, you trusted me to tell me all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
I need to do justice to your loved one, and if I'm doing justice to my loved one, it should hurt me to do it.
Yeah.
Right? So if you ever want to get a Blizzard, we can get Blizzards.
I will take you up on that
Yeah,
offer.
it's
I will.
definitely recommended.
Rabbi Yoni, I just had a horrible story. Can you meet me at Dairy Queen in the parking lot, please?
100%.
Okay.
100. I never turned down a Blizzard.
You know what?
So-
I worked at Dairy Queen in high school.
Okay,
So
now
I
we're
know-
getting into what I want to talk about.
Yeah,
right
I
now.
was a Blizzard tech, is what we called ourselves.
You have to
back
flip
then.
it over to show them how.
You know what? We didn't, because our boss was afraid that it actually might come out. Like that it was the wrong consistency, so we didn't flip them over for people.
I would just be waiting there and being like, I'm not taking that until you flip it.
Yeah, they would have flipped on your hands probably.
I'm cognizant of time, and I want to let some folks ask some questions or open it up a little bit too. But I also want to talk about the power of words in general. I was reading in preparation for talking to you tonight. I pulled off my shelf Rabbi Lawrence Kushner's book, which is just a book of Hebrew letters, and it's talking about the magic of Hebrew letters. And I almost wanted to bring it and just read the intro because it's beautiful. But it's talking about how these letters, you can look at them on the page, but they've always existed. They've existed when the world was created. They'll exist long after we're gone. The letters of, he's talking about specifically about Hebrew letters, which is a Kabbalistic mystical idea where one of the mystical trends of Judaism was just to sit in the darkness or by candlelight and just write different Hebrew letters, or rearranging different Hebrew letters, writing God's name out in a million different ways for hours. And the mystics would talk about the mystical experience of this. And I think when I was in rabbinical school in college, I was like, wow, that's the draw of Judaism to me. But now that I'm a little bit older, I think it's also just, you could do that with any language, right? Mm-hmm. And sit and just look at how incredible the written word is. That it allows us to do something, and it allows us to feel different things, transport us to different places and times, crush us, mm-hmm. give us incredible joy, and all it is ink on paper.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you have, examples in your life of times when that's happened, or when you feel that, whether you're reading or writing. If there's anything that comes to mind just like from that idea, and especially now as you're a mom, like when you're reading books to your daughter, and when you're talking, or language, when you're watching her develop what this is going to be for her life.
Yeah.
Words. Like, what does that do?
So on that subject of my daughter, it's actually very fascinating. I read to her all the time. Before bed, during the day, like we have books everywhere. She has access to books on the floor, on the couch, they're everywhere. And recently we have a puzzle of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, the English alphabet. And I don't know, I guess yesterday I just asked her, like, where's the B? Where's the letter B? And she pointed to it. And I was like, okay, was that just a coincidence? Where's the letter R? And she pointed to it. And then I kept going, T, S, like random ones. And she there were some she missed, but she got the majority. And again, she's 15 months old. So I'm sitting here like, is this normal? Like, what am I doing to this child? Like, I don't know if this is bad. But there's something about letters and the connection. And again, like, it's not like I sat down and taught her the alphabet. Like, she watches Sesame Street sometimes. Sure, there's the letter of the day. Maybe that's how she learned. But there is something there that I think is like a higher power, where somehow you just know that these are the letters and you connect with them.
Right. You can tell. I think even babies can tell that there's something about this that's different than this.
Yes.
Right? I don't know if you had, like, when you did tummy time and stuff, the things that we're supposed to put in front of our babies are like black and white things because it's the easiest thing for their eyes to recognize, and like different patterns and stuff. But I think all of that is based on writing too. Here's symbols. Here are things that are, as the mystics again in Judaism say, the Torah is black fire written on white fire. Like, that's what a parchment of the scroll itself is supposed to represent. And I think, again, that's true for just language. Here's fire, it draws us to it.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to see that with kids.
It is. And to make that connection. And I don't know, maybe she's just at the cusp of really developing this week or something like that. But I felt pretty good. I'm like, okay, I'm doing something right,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. So what do you think, I don't want to end in a kind of a bleak or cynical note, but going back to the idea of for our kids, the humanities increasingly being less available to them, in a culture where we continue to focus on how do we do this for the economy, how do we do this to make a real living and get a real job, as opposed to being a poet or an artist or anything like that. where do we go? How do we take these kids that you're empowering and say, this wasn't your camp experience in the summer when you were in high school. We need you.
Yeah.
We need your voices, and we need you to amplify those voices and to empower others to do the same.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a big question. I wish I had the answer to it, but I think just more resources, more nonprofits like us, just grassroots organizations starting up and offering opportunities for students to get involved in other things outside of school. I don't see the schools, unless we get like an influx of funding for humanities, I don't see them bringing back all these things that have been stripped away, unfortunately. Maybe they will, maybe I'm wrong, but so really I think it's up to local nonprofits to do this work, local synagogues and churches, and offering, creative experiences for youth to get involved outside of school. I think that's going to be the easiest thing to do.
And that's hard.
Yeah. Right. It's easy but hard.
Right. Do you think, I'm taking all your guys' time, I'm sorry, but do you think when you have a poet laureate or someone like Amanda Gorman who's young and giving a voice that's a young voice, does that change anything, or is it just nice to look at for a couple years and say, like, that was great, but it doesn't actually inspire anything?
You know what? I think she's inspiring the younger poets. They see her and they see, oh, I'm a poet too, and I'm a woman of color too, and I can do that. She's giving them hope, and she's giving them, the permission to say, like, okay, you can do this too. So yeah, I think it's fantastic. I think that needed to happen. Nani Comer is from Detroit, and she was just named, I can't remember who was, I think it was Michigan's poet laureate, or was it Detroit poet laureate? I'm gonna get this wrong, but she's.
We'll edit it. We'll,
okay.
Whatever. Say all of them, and we'll put the right one in.
She's participated in Detroit Writing Room events, and she's accessible, and she's in the community, and I think just having more positions like that would be helpful in uplifting people's voices and giving them opportunities to write and present their work. That's all that's needed.
Amazing. Thank you for your time. Thanks for
you.
coming.
Thank all of you.
Yeah,
who are
thank
here
you
too.
all for sure. And again, we won't be able to hear your questions on the podcast or in the video, but I'll repeat them. So if anyone has any questions or anything that they'd like to ask Stephanie, go ahead. Yes, my father-in-law, go ahead.
How do they get yourself known to the high school? How do they find out about you? And then what's the process? Do they apply? Do you accept all of them? Is there a fee involved?
So how do you first just let high schoolers know that you're doing what you're doing? Mm-hmm. Is it word of mouth? Do you go out into the schools, and then is that the correct?
How do you apply?
And then how do they apply? What's the application process? Right.
Yeah. So we have a database now of high school counselors and principals and English teachers, and if there are arts-related teachers. So we try and spread the word by letting all those teachers know about these opportunities and hope that they then pass it along to their students. We also kind of email to the libraries and local other arts and writing-related nonprofits that might work with students. And we post a lot on social media. If you follow the Detroit Writing Room or Coaching Detroit Forward, feel free to do that. But it is an application process because there are scholarships available, so we can't accept everybody, unfortunately, who applies. But if you are a Detroit high school student, it will be free for you to attend if you are accepted. We have grant partners who help us fund these camps. We have local sponsors as well, and just individual supporters and donors who believe in what we're doing and say, I want to sponsor a student to attend for free. So they can also choose to sponsor someone from Farmington Hills if they want to. So if you are a Metro Detroit student, there is a fee for the journalism camp. This year it's $600. We're going to be at Wayne State University this summer, so we're going to offer lunch for them. There's costs involved with parking and everything that it takes to run a camp. But if anyone in the audience knows any high school students that might be interested, the deadline to apply is actually tomorrow. So let
Get
them know
on it.
tonight.
Right.
If the application comes in a couple days later, it's fine. I'll still look at it. But they can go on our website, DetroitWritingRoom.com or CoachingDetroitForward.org.
Awesome. Is part of the application process a writing sample?
That would actually be a good idea, but we have them fill out questions like, why are they interested in journalism? What do they hope to learn? What kind of experiences have they already had when it comes to writing? And then for the photography students, kind of similar. What do they want to learn? What photography experience do they have? Do they know how to use a professional camera, or is it just their cell phone? Which either way, we'll still accept them. So yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, Dieta.
It's a great question.
Yeah. The question is, how does one break out or even just get into journalism when journalism changes so dramatically, and traditional journalism, print journalism, has in some places disappeared entirely, and in other places been shells of what they once were, and increasing media is going on digital platforms and in other ways of getting word out.
I am very mindful of this very issue in terms of, telling students to go into journalism when the field is shrinking dramatically. And I think the way we really frame this camp is, yes, you learn journalism skills, but you're really learning writing and storytelling skills that are applicable for all sorts of fields, including law, business, medicine, communications, PR, marketing. You need to be a good writer for so many different jobs. So what we're really trying to tell the students is like, yes, if you want to pursue journalism, that's awesome. We're going to support you all the way and connect you with internships and resources, and all of our connections that the coaches have. But really, you can use this experience that you learn at journalism camp and go off and do accounting, which one of our students did. She just got into Tennessee State and is majoring in accounting, but is using the journalism experience in some way in those classes. So with regard to, connecting them to opportunities, there are a lot of jobs in the digital media world that do need a journalism background. A lot of outlets are online. They're also looking for people to write newsletters, like daily newsletters that get delivered to your email inbox. Those require journalism skills. Social media, even all these companies want social media managers. You need to be able to write and storytell to do that. So, a journalism degree could translate into a social media role of some sort. So you can get really creative with it. But the truth is, yes, it is a lot harder to get a job in journalism these days, I think, than even a couple years ago. It's just the job might look a little different than a typical print newspaper reporter who's like covering crime every day.
Yeah. Awesome. Jerry? Yeah, a powerful question. So the question is, how do you remain objective
There you go. Yeah.
especially when you're telling stories that might feel really contrary to your own personal beliefs? And I guess my follow-up question is it possible to truly be objective?
No.
Right.
No,
Okay.
it's not. And journalism professors will say you have to be objective and fair and balanced. But no, we're human. We all have opinions. We all have feelings about different things. You cannot be 100% objective all the time. It's not possible. But you can try to balance your personal beliefs by talking to people who have different beliefs. And like I said before, every story has to have at least 3 sources. So you want to make sure you're talking to several people to get their side of the story. And even if it's different from your personal opinion, you still want to, give them space to share what they have to say. And you have to go to another place and know, okay, I don't maybe believe in this, but someone else does. And I'm going to give them the time and the space to give their thoughts and opinions in this piece. Assuming that, they're not demeaning someone or, being derogatory. But yeah, it's hard. It's a very hard thing to do. And I think the best outlets acknowledge that you can't really be objective all the time and let reporters pursue stories that they care about and are meaningful to them, and still, do it in a fair and a balanced way by talking to a host of people.
Right. Jerry was asking it as a hypothetical because in this country we all have one opinion and we all agree with each other in a very beautiful way. So it's very peaceful, our dialogue these days. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Well, so journalism, though, keep in mind, you can be a news reporter and be a journalist, and a news reporter needs to be objective. You can be an opinion columnist, and in that case, you can share anything you'd like. That's for the editorial page. And you can have newspapers who have a very conservative editorial page, but their news stories, for example, the Detroit News, are fair and balanced. I worked for the Detroit News for a couple years as a features reporter, and it's a very conservative opinion page, but we did our best, and I think, did a great job at telling the news in a fair and balanced way that did not invoke any sort of opinion into
Amazing.
the stories.
Great.
Yeah.
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 Mr. Broner. If you're one of her students who has a lot of creativity, a lot of great ideas, where do you get the help to get the tech part? Where do you get the technical skills to be able to do this?
So we pair our students with coaches. So they are professional journalists and authors, and they're meant to be their mentor during camp, but also way after camp ends. A lot of our coaches will write college recommendation letters for students and help them with their college application essays. So if you're a student who wants to expand their skills and work on them, your coach is your mentor really for life. And we pair them with a specific person based on common interests, but really they can tap any of our coaches at any time who will be more than willing to talk with them and help them.
Amazing. Any other questions? Shelby.
Yeah, are they given a rubric or any parameters for their stories? So that's a good question. We have certain beats that Perspectives Magazine kind of divides the stories into sections, which is news, business, sports, arts and entertainment, and I might be missing one, opinion.
I'm quizzing you.
Oh, health. Health is one. And we added social justice, too. So we tell the students you can pick a story in any of these kind of beats is what we call them. And what I have them do really the first and second day of camp is they have to pitch me their story like they would a freelance writer, and come up with a couple sentences to talk about who they're going to interview, what their story is, why they want to write it, and how they're going to go about it. So that's my favorite part of camp, is getting all their pitches in and seeing what the diverse topics are going to be about.
Do you shut them down sometimes? You're like, no.
Have I shut them down? No. If anything, I might coach them into a different direction with a story. Yeah, that might be a little bit easier to tackle. I think one student wanted to try to interview Lizzo at one point 2 summers ago, and I'm like, she might be a little hard to get a hold of in 2 weeks, mind you. You can by all means go for it, but you might want to try considering these other sources too.
Curb your expectations there.
Yeah. But hey, go for it. If you can reach Lizzo, I mean, by all means. One student did interview Sanjay Gupta from CNN.
Whoa, that's pretty cool.
It was a story on masking and the mask debate back in 2020, so she did reach him. So, it can happen.
That's cool. That's
Yeah.
very amazing. I love it. Any other questions?
Good question.
Thank you. Again,
Thank
thank you. I'm going to volunteer you to stick around for a little bit if anyone wants
Happy
to not be on the pod and be able to come and ask a question or two.
Yeah, no, come take a look at the magazines.
Yeah,
too,
we've got
take
some literature over here
flyers.
and different things. Please check it out. You're very brave. This is our first, you're the guinea pig for
Happy to
doing
be
this
a
in a
guinea
live
pig.
format. But we're thrilled that you
Thank
are
you.
here. And thank you for all that you do for the community. And
I appreciate it.
we'd love to have you back.
Yeah, and feel free. Our website is DetroitWritingRoom.com. We're currently running an author series right now at the Whitney in Detroit. So it's going through June. We have on May 31st Judge Rosemary Aquilina, who presided over the Larry Nassar trial. She wrote a memoir. She'll be up next. And then we also have Desiree Cooper, who has written a children's book, and Rochelle Riley, former Free Press columnist and current City of Detroit Arts and Culture Director, who's writing a book. So we'd love for you all to join us then if you're free.
But did you by any chance write a book?
I did. I didn't even
We're
talk
gonna-
about it,
I gotta,
but it's
pitch her
a
book
couple years
too.
ago. It's okay.
But it's very cool too. It's
Uh,
in my Amazon shopping cart right now.
Oh, I should have brought you a copy. It's In the Name of Editorial Freedom, 125 Years at the Michigan Daily. It's a collection of stories by journalists who all worked at the Michigan Daily at one point in college and then went on to the New York Times and Wall Street Journal and ESPN. And they wrote a story about something they covered while a student. So presidential elections, the Vietnam War in Ann Arbor, not the Vietnam War in Ann
Protests,
Arbor,
right,
but
yeah.
yes.
It's a little known story of the Vietnam War.
Yes, you really got to buy this book. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's that came out in 2015 when it was the 125th anniversary of the student newspaper.
Amazing. Very cool. All right. Thank you again,
Thank you.
Stephanie. I'm going to power down all of the tech up here, but I'll let Stephanie will be up front or in the lobby if you guys want to have a l'chaim and stick around and have some snacks. Thank you guys for coming out. This is wonderful to be able to be together.